The biggest misconception about working with the breath is that when we breathe more, we are getting more oxygen. We are not getting more oxygen. We are getting rid of more CO2. And CO2 is an incredibly important molecule in the body, not just for all of the functions of the body, but also for how we deal with stress and overwhelm. Keep watching this video if you want to understand the way that CO2 impacts our capacity to deal with stress and overwhelm, and check out one of the practices below if you'd like to start cultivating this capacity to deal with these. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to live a happier, healthier life with a healthy nervous system. So as mentioned in the intro, oxygen is not the chemical driver for respiration. Chemical driver for respiration is actually CO2. And when we breathe more, we don't actually get more oxygen. And this has been proven as when we measure the amount of oxygen in the air, it's normally around 20%. And when we measure the amount of oxygen in somebody's exhale, it's about 15%. So we're only using a quarter of the oxygen that's available to us in the air. So we really need to get out of the idea that when we breathe heavily, we're getting more oxygen. We're not. We're getting rid of more CO2. But this brings up the question, do we want to get rid of more CO2? Because what we find now in the fascinating world of modern research into these realms is that CO2 is an incredibly important molecule which has more functions than I will go into in this video. But just a few is that it actually helps us get oxygen into the cells. It helps us to calm down the nervous system, and it is used in almost every cellular metabolism, making it necessary for organ function. But what we're talking about in this video is not the functions of CO2, but the relationship between CO2 tolerance and our capacity to deal with stress, overwhelm, and our general level of mental health. You see, the chemical driver for respiration is called the chemoreceptor for CO2. It's a structure here in the bottom of the brainstem which tells us when the concentration of CO2 is becoming too high in the blood. When it becomes too high, it sends a signal that causes us to upregulate our breath, to start breathing faster and heavier. Now I want to ask you, what emotions also cause a person to start breathing faster and heavier? People breathe faster and heavier when they're in stressful situations, when they're becoming overwhelmed and they're aiming subconsciously to manage that overwhelm. And this really is the first evidence of this relationship that I'm going to unfold here. You see, what happens when we get into a stressful situation is that the circuitry of our fear and anxiety, our survival instincts starts getting charged. And actually, this CO2 receptor, the chemoreceptor for CO2, is the foundation of all of the fear structures. In a sense, it is our deepest biological fear, the fear of suffocation and therefore death. Its place there doesn't just make it the foundation, it also makes it something of a buffer or a shock absorber. So as we become stressed by stimuli in our awareness, it's going to send signals down to this place, overloading this sensor, making it even more sensitive to the amounts of CO2 in the body. And so we start to upregulate the breath, we start breathing faster. Ironically, breathing faster tells the body that we're in more danger, and this can become something of a feedback loop. But for our purposes, what's important to know is that this structure starts to become overloaded, and so it exhales more CO2 to reduce the load on itself. The trouble with this is that as we exhale more CO2 chronically, this creates a feedback loop where the tolerance of this structure gets less and less, making us more and more susceptible to stress and overwhelm. So what can we do about it? Well, you see, we can go the other direction. If we are having this trouble because the tolerance for CO2 is too low and it can't handle the amount of information that we're receiving, then the solution is to increase the tolerance of CO2. This can be done in a number of different ways. There's some practices down below to help you to start to train your tolerance for CO2 and thus train your capacity to deal with stress and overwhelm. And this isn't just making some correlation. This has been tested in the scientific research in a number of different instances. We see that increasing our tolerance for CO2 has such effects as increasing our capacity to deal with short-term stress, increasing our capacity to deal with long-term stress, and even reducing the symptoms of things like depression. So CO2 is not only important for the body, it's incredibly key for mental health. And personally, my life has changed for the better since I started creating this capacity to deal with higher levels of stress. I used to deal with a lot of social anxiety, and I now know that it's been increasing my CO2 tolerance, which has given me more capacity to engage with crowds, to engage with people in busy places, and to really enjoy my life. And so if you're looking to live a happier, healthier life where you can do more of the things that you'd like to do, but you're constantly feeling stress and overwhelmed, then I really recommend that you start by training your CO2 tolerance daily, increasing your tolerance for that stress and overwhelm. I hope this has been educational. Check out the practices. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe if this information was useful for you, and all the best in your journey to a healthy nervous system.